And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 670 and a half. The half comes in with the fact that I don't usually do these podcasts on a Sunday afternoon, or at least it's Sunday afternoon here in the UK. I'm usually doing these on a Tuesday evening. As you can see down in the bit here, it says Tuesday 7:30 UK time on Facebook Live. But I wanted to trial out YouTube, see whether it's a possibility of streaming them live. At the moment, I do them live on Facebook and then record them and put them up on YouTube. But not entirely sure how the quality is going to be, what the feedback is going to be like, how easy it is to pick up people chatting, whether it's likely to be freezing or any of these kind of things. So, hence the YouTube trial. And it's not being done at my usual 7:30 time. I thought I would just throw it into a Sunday, which might help a few people out, although I figured I'd probably lose a few more people who are used to the Tuesday as well. Currently, it says I've got about 7 viewers. Maybe a couple more people will come in. If you are watching this, we are absolutely live right at the moment. Please drop a comment into the comments. Let me know you're here. So, yes, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to run this just like a normal podcast. So, I'm 70.5. So essentially, I'm kind of carrying on from the one that I did this Tuesday past, where I was talking about the sculptures by Geoff Forrest. And I talked about the photographing the geese that he had down at the sculpture park. Or rather the sculpture trail at the Wetland and Wildfowl and Wetland Trust at Caerlaverock in Dumfries in southwest Scotland. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the other photos that I did there, specifically with an otter and a dragonfly, and to talk a little bit about the challenges of photographing them. So to give you a sense of what we're talking about, here, no, not that one. Where we go. Yep. So this then is one of the otters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting this photo and some of the other photos and why we decided to do this. So that's part of what this episode is going to be about. But then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do a critique section. A few people put into the Facebook group images that they're looking for feedback, critique on. So Angela has put this photo in of this bridge and is wanting a little bit more feedback on how she might have cropped it differently or worked it in a slightly different way. So we're going to be sort of looking at options there. Jim put in this photo of this old iron fence with a cross and barbed wire, which is in front of an old convent or nunnery in Dumfries. So we're going to be looking at what he's asking for and the bits of feedback there. Vandana took this picture on her phone of a couple of kids playing. Again, it's looking for some feedback of what she might have done differently. And Fiji has been playing with photos of shells in her at home, just kind of on the table, and is looking for a little bit more idea on what she could do with them. So that's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Now, I'm not entirely sure quite how long this will go on for. Could be half an hour, could be an hour. I certainly don't want to go beyond that. I can see we have a couple of comments in already, which is great. Jim says, "Hi Kim, ready and waiting in a rather damp Dumfries." Dumfries is about 15 to 20 miles, about 20 miles up the road from here, and yes, it's damp here in Castle Douglas as well. Rosie from Whithorn says, "Hi Kim, hoping everything goes smoothly for you." Thank you, Rosie, much appreciated. Oh, Maggie says, "Hi everyone." She's in the kitchen just there, which is trying to keep an eye on. She's going to come in and tell me if suddenly I go silent or my voice goes high and squeaky or the screen freezes up. So that's appreciated. Jim says, "Very clear video and audio." That's good to know. Meg says, "Hi Dad from a damp Castle Douglas in Scotland." Now Meg is my daughter and she's currently sitting downstairs in our living room watching live, which she doesn't normally do because Meg is on doesn't have a Facebook account, so she usually watches all these on catch up. So yeah, So this is Meg's first live experience as such. Jackie from South Africa says hello everybody. And now Murphy says hi, says howdy from Texas, and that's Robert. So for anybody who's thinking who on earth is that, but yeah, howdy from Texas is Robert there. And Jackie says all well on my side too. And Robert is saying you look 10 years younger. And I guess what he's referring to here is, yes, I have, for anybody who didn't pick up on social media, between Tuesday and now, I have in fact trimmed the big bushy beard that I had. And I've had quite a few people say that I look several years younger because of it. Right, okay, so that's good. We have people in the house or online and right, comments. So we have comments, we have people. This all seems to be going live. People are telling me that this is okay, that the streaming quality seems to be fine. We're up to about 9 viewers now. A couple of likes, comments. This is good. This is good. Now, the question is, will it stay this way? Other couple of little changes as well as the beard. You might notice the lighting setup is slightly different, and that's because it's the middle of the day here. I understand, of course, Texas, it's going to be early in the morning, presuming you've probably not just long had your breakfast, or might still be eating it, Robert. Now, VG doesn't seem to be in here from India yet, but it will be a much more easy time for her at about 6 o'clock in India, I think, or rather than the midnight where she usually tunes in from. Oh, Jackie seems to think the short beard looks better. So yeah, because it's daytime, I'm not having to have the lights on. I am lit purely by window light from over there. Now, it's a dull day. Now, I don't get strong sunlight coming this far into the room anyway. But yeah, so it's kind of just general soft light. And, you know, I've talked before about the idea of size of the light source affects the quality of the shadow. But so because we've got a window there and it's a soft, you know, just a dull all-round light, you'll see the shadow, in fact, on the wall behind. It's fairly soft. It's not hard shadow. So, yeah, quick lighting tip for you. Okay, well, let's make a start then. So where I was talking about Geoff Forrest, a sculptor who originally worked in willow, now works in steel, and I did a set of photos. I did photos for him before, and I talked more in depth about that. I'll not go over too much of it, but in the previous episode, episode 70, which you can also find here on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/Kim Ayres, well, you may well kind of very close there already, then you can access all the previous 70 episodes. Also, don't forget, if you haven't done yet, please subscribe here on YouTube and make sure you click the little notification bell so that you will get notification each time I go live or stick a new video up. Really important. The other thing is, of course, actually, if you also want to support these, there is always buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Can't forget that. That's always appreciated. So what we're going to talk back to Geoff Forrest then. So on Tuesday past, on episode 70, I talked about being out at the Wetland and Wildfowl Trust in Caerlaverock and the trickiness we went through to photograph the geese. Now he has several other sculptures there, and it runs until it's either the 22nd or the 28th of August. But basically for a couple more weeks. So if you're in the area, worth going along and taking a look. Now, basically, the two other ones that are two other sculptures which I think probably have a little bit more story to them, worth playing around with. The first is the otter. Now, the otter is, I don't know, possibly close to 2 meters long. Now, when I went out there on a kind of recce mission, the very first time I went out there with Geoff, we walked around, we looked at the sculptures, we talked about the strengths and weaknesses of where and how we might photograph them. Essentially, just to show you here, this is what the otter looked like where it had been placed. And when it had been placed, the grass was already shorter, and so we were already aware that the grass was kind of shooting up around it. To give a little bit more context of where it is, you can just see in the far background the sort of main building complex of the Wetland Trust. And here's a bunch of reeds and everything else. But the problem was this was already getting lost in amongst the grasses. Now, they did then actually later on lift it out of there and move it along a bit, but then grass started shooting up around that as well. So that was just sort of give me a sense of what it was that I was going to have to photograph. That wasn't the final photograph. Similarly, he had a dragonfly in a place where there was a lot of reeds coming up, a lot of place where dragonflies go as well. Now, unlike most of the other steel sculptures, which have been galvanised, this one deliberately hasn't, so that you've got all the incredible rust colouring on it. And this dragonfly, again, probably something like 1.5 meters wingspan, something like that. I can't remember if it was as wide as 2 meters, but also sitting on a leaf which comes up out of the grass as well. So these were taken on a dull day, and in fact, yeah, that's right. Just to give myself a kind of a rough idea of what kind of things I would have to start thinking about. Then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I went back to take the first photos of the geese, which is the ones that I showed you last Tuesday. And that was in the evening. And after we'd taken the photos of the geese, we went round to sort of take a look at the otter. And having seen the otter sort of lost amongst the grass, earlier on, Geoff and I had seen a little river, and we thought maybe the otter down on the riverbank would be a better place. So with the help of a few volunteers, we actually carried the otter down and put it by the side of this river, which you can just about see. By this time, the sun was getting really low, just about setting, but of course it's cloudy as well, so there wasn't a lot of light. And while I certainly thought this was a much, much better setting, the light just wasn't good enough to be able to feel like we were going to get a decent photo of the level, the standard that we wanted. Similarly, when I went over to the dragonfly, again, you can see that the light isn't really there. But also, what was really noticeable was just how high these grasses had risen. I mean, if we just take a look at this, which was taken 3 weeks earlier, to this, the grass was now rising. The reeds were kind of going so high that you'd more or less lost that leaf underneath. So that was going to create a few more problems as well. The following weekend, 1 week later, it was all forecast for bright sunshine, and it turned out to be bright sunshine, clear blue skies. And so I went out mid to late afternoon to take some more photos, and a few more volunteers came along and helped to sort of start moving these things around. So we took the otter and we went back down to that little bit of river, but in the much better light. And to show you then, this was the photo we ended up with, or one of them. And now you get a much, much better sense, I think. You've got the light glinting off the otter, using that nice bit of river to sort of come up behind it. And you do get a lot of otters down at this point. They have been seen. I think there are 1 or 2 places where there are even little otter prints in the mud flats. Another closer in shot where you can kind of start to see the actual is sculpted to create the otter. What's happened now? That's frozen. Have I frozen? Okay, suddenly everything's frozen. That's going not responding. Click over here. Why is everything suddenly? I don't know whether... Right. Okay, not sure what quite happened there. Okay, you could let me know whether everything froze or whether that was okay. I had a freeze up moment on this side of the... Right, okay, that's saying not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience buffering. Right, not quite so good. Okay, so let's flip back here for a moment then. And okay.
Frozen, but you're back again.
Right, okay. Great. So I was frozen, but I am back again. So I'm still subject to things freezing up. But what I don't know is whether that's streaming health, or whether it was my computer deciding to do something and just freeze me up anyway, because unfortunately, as you know, if you're working with a laptop, if something decides it's going to download and update, it can slow down everything else while you're at it. Okay, so let's move, go back to then, where was I talking about? So actually, I see a couple of extra comments, so I'll just quickly talk about these as well. Oh, VG's come in and said, hi everyone. Rosie says, the Dragonfly is fabulous. Are these still at place at Caerlaverock? Yes, they are, until I think it's the 22nd of August, or it might be the 28th, but double check on that. I thought it was the 28th, but I'm fairly sure I recently saw it saying the 22nd. So if you want to get out there, Rosie, head out there within the next 2 weeks. Oh yeah, Robert said, yes, you are frozen. Maggie says, you did freeze, but you're back now. Jackie says, froze, but back here again. And similarly, Rosie says the same. And Jim says, not sure if it was me, but it's buffering. But it started buffering, and Jim says, okay now. Okay, so Rosie says, lovely otter shot. Good. Okay, so we seem to be back again, so that's good. So what I'm going to do, so where was I? Boom, boom, take that down, and I was with pictures. Pictures have vanished. There we go. Right, so where were we? Yeah. So let's flip back across. So yes, so here's a closer up shot of what I was saying with the otter, where you get a better sense of the build of it. And then here's one where I just kind of came in close. I've got the wide angle lens on. It creates a bit of distortion, but I really quite like it as sort of, you get a feeling of being really close up, kind of. What I also love about this otter, I mean, even with this one, is the sense that it feels like it's about to move. You know, it's like it's looking around its shoulder, it's heard a noise. At any moment, it could shoot off one way or dive into the water. Lovely life, lovely sense of sculpture. So that was the otter. So it certainly worked an awful lot better once we had the sunshine out. Then we went round to do the dragonfly again. And at this point, now I'm standing on a step ladder. They've moved it a bit out of some of the deeper reeds, which have now got even higher another week into it. We've got sunlight, so the sunlight is certainly working better and showing up all this lovely rusted metal. And we can now see the leaf because we pulled it out. However, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to get a sense of the wings, because at the moment, part of the problem is the dragonfly was sort of leaning back slightly. So even though I was on a stepladder, I was still sort of looking straight at it, and I didn't really get a proper sense of the wings. So what we did was there was a little kind of pool just to one side, and we lifted it out and placed it down so that I could get a shot above. And we ended up with this. And this then gives you a much better sense of what the wings are like. And we've also got rather nice shadow running along the leaf as well. So I was quite pleased with that. But then I thought, oh, what would happen if I got under it? Because we were now able to lift it out of the reeds. There's a little platform just immediately in front of this, which I was standing on in order to shoot down on it. So we lifted the whole thing onto the platform, and basically I lay down underneath. And then in order so that so I could shoot up against the sky, but in order so it wouldn't be entirely silhouette, I brought out a reflector and had the sunlight bouncing to light it underneath. And we ended up with this, which I must admit I could have a wee smug moment over. So we're looking at this dragonfly from underneath. You can see all the rust, but it's also lit up. Even though it's quite a bright sky, it's lit up because just down to the left of this, I've got a golden reflector, which is bouncing the sunlight back up onto it. We've got the sunlight itself coming through the reeds, and all in all, I think that, that one worked quite well. So really, the dragonfly then, if you consider, we went from this, which is, taken on a dull day from one angle, to this taken on a dull evening where it's disappearing. And then eventually, by playing around, we managed to get to this. So it's always worth playing around. Well, at the point that I went out to take the photo of the dragonfly, I wasn't considering this angle. I was purely considering the idea of being above it. But once you're there, you experiment, you play, you look out for ideas, and sometimes the best stuff comes where you had no plan for it at all. You almost accidentally kind of fall upon it. And that's pretty much what happened with that. So that gives you an idea of what I was talking about with the Geoff Forrest photos. So take another little look here where Meg says looks like the dragonfly is flying in the air. VG says froze for a few seconds but back, and VG also says wow from underneath is spectacular, and Jackie also says vast improvement. Cool. Okay, this is good. So that's what I wanted to talk about with the Geoff Forrest photos, and I hope you found that kind of interesting. And certainly anybody who lives in or near Dumfries and Galloway in southwest Scotland, I would highly recommend going out to the Wetland and Wildfowl Trust at Caerlaverock near Dumfries. Right, okay, so having done that bit, that's all worked. So let's move on to the critique section. So if anybody does happen to be watching here who's not one of the regulars come across from the Tuesday, then this section is the critique section. This is where people put in images and questions to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, which you can just type that into Facebook and you'll find the group, join the group, and then you can submit your images and ask for feedback. So I place them into the podcast and we talk through them so that not just you but anybody else watching can also get ideas of ways you might have improved the photo, whether that's how you know the technical side of how you took it, or compositional, or conceptual, these kind of things. So hopefully you find it interesting. Right, okay, so what we'll do then is let's start with Angela. So yeah, that's the other thing, is I'm sitting here with a cup of tea at the moment. Getting close to the end, in which case I'll turn to the glass of water in them too. Right, so Angela sent in this photo and said, I have limited capabilities with editing software and I think it would probably be better if I could remove the streak showing in the road. Any other suggestions to make this better? Okay, Angela, well, first of all, I was trying to think what you meant by the streak in the road, and I guess you're talking about this here, which is tyre tracks, which I don't know that it necessarily detracts too much. For my mind, it's because it's going straight and it's following kind of the lines of the barriers and what have you, it's still just more of the, you know, it's adding to that sense of the composition which is drawing you into the image. Now, in terms of, well, if you did want to get rid of it, you can use it. If you have the software, you can use a cloning tool or a patch tool okay, let's open with Photoshop and just briefly show you how that might work. So if I've got a spot healing tool here, and if I zoom in a bit like this, because this is quite small, it might actually just work in its own right. If I just sort of do something like that, and there, it's pretty much vanished. I can get rid of a couple of other little patches if I want. And it really is as straightforward as that. Other than that, sometimes you could use a cloning tool. So at that point, with a cloning tool, you're copying one part of the picture and painting it in over the other. So if I copied that part of the picture, I could then paint it in here. But rather than copying a bit of leaf, obviously what I do is if I copy a bit of road, that's just next to it, and then maybe slightly further over, I can literally paint that out like that. So I'm copying one bit of the road and painting it over the other. So that's the kind of quick way you do it if you have the editing software for it. Now, the other thing I would say about this in ways of improving this, I know you've gone for the square crop here, but because you've got all these lines kind of pulling into the middle, my feeling is that it would I can quite easily imagine that this would work well in a more landscape or even slightly cinematic crop. So if I go to the crop tool here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use content aware so that this will fill in the gaps. Now, it's not going to be quite the same as if you stood back and took the photo itself, but it gives you a sense of what's going on. So with that in mind, I could, if if I stretch this out a bit this way and stretch it out a bit this way, we end up with a wider, slightly more interesting. And then maybe we don't need, well, let's try this first. So we've got content aware, and I'll just click enter on that. And whilst it's not exact, it does give a sense of a bit more bridge kind of coming out. And at that point also, I tend to feel that the white part of the bottom is perhaps just grabbing too much attention. And you could even bring that up a little bit. You don't need as much road in there as you've got, because really you've taken it at road level. And because you're looking up, really the story isn't so much about the road, it's about the structure, it's about the bridge itself. If you were higher up and looking down, the story would have been much more about the road. The road here is a device, is part of the photo, but it's in a supporting role to the structures of the bridge. Excuse me. Now, having said that, I'll just duplicate that layer again. What I think you could also do with this is to consider the idea of, because there's some really interesting, it's about the kind of texture and lines. This might also work in black and white. Now, if you just do a straightforward desaturation, then you'll probably find it's not really giving us so much, because what's happened here is the greens in the background have kind of black and whited fairly similar kind of tonally to the rusty reds of the bridge. So actually you don't get so much in the black and white there. So that's not necessarily a good way of doing it. If we go to the channels here where it splits the red, green and blue, that might give us a bit more of a clue. So in the red, you see what happens is which creates red and yellows. Everything's a bit brighter, but the yellows in the green of the background have also lifted a bit. If we go to the blue channel, there's not a lot in either of these, so everything's gone dark. In the green channel, there's maybe a little bit more contrast. So the background is a bit lighter, the foreground, the structure of the bridge is slightly darker, and I think that works better. Now, maybe not enough in itself here, so the other option that certainly you have in black and white, you have in some editing software, is if you go to black and white, and then you have a bunch of sliders, and you can lighten and darken, say, the reds, and you can lighten and darken the yellows and the greens and so on. Now, when we come to blues, that doesn't really make any difference because there's virtually nothing in it. But if what we were to do, say, is lighten the greens, so we kind of brighten up the, but then darken the reds, brighten the yellows. Now the yellow, the thing is, the rust is a kind of mix of red and yellow. So we can the yellow lightens all of it, but at the same time we can darken it with the reds as well. And I think if we sort of play around with a balance, something like that, what we find here now is that we've got that structure and it's showing up against the background because the background is lighter now than the structure itself. Another thing you could do then, if you wanted to take that a little bit further, is if you actually play with the brightness and contrast and then take the contrast slider and push it up and, you know, get up the brightness a bit, up the contrast a bit, and then that kind of... So that's an idea. It's an idea if you wanted to go black and white. But the first thing is really just that idea of, I think, whether you're black and whiting it or not, I think that notion of a wider thing for this, because it's all about the structure, a wider starting photo gives you more of that structure to give you that kind of long kind of perspective lines coming down. Whereas in your original crop, it just feels like it's been squashed in a bit, and I kind of feel like you've missed a trick there. So I hope that works, Angela. I hope that gives you some ideas to play with. Right. Okay. So next up then, let's what are we dealing with? Okay, let's go to VG. So VG's been playing around with some shells, which he sort of placed down and took a couple of photos and said. So let's pull up a shell photo and show you what we're talking about. So she's done two shells. She's done this one and she's done this one. And what VG says is, I would like to know more about the placement of the shell and the light to cast the shadows. Somehow I feel the angles are falling flat. Please let me know how to work this better. So I think you're right here, really, VG. That there is there's a sense of flatness and dullness. Now, part of this is that it's quite dark. I think you could probably let's see, your f-stop 4, exposure time 1/3 of a second, ISO 100. That's really good. But I think maybe your exposure time you could have gone down to ½ a second or even 1 second. Would have let a bit more light in. But we can adjust that a little bit with the levels. But okay, let's take these into Photoshop, and let's drag both of these in, because I think one of the first things I want to say with both of these is, while I know you're kind of going for a rule of thirds off center, I kind of feel I just pushed a little bit too far over to one side. So again, if I go to, let's go to the crop, let's go to content aware. And if I just move this over a little bit here, so we have a little bit less on the right, a little bit more on the back, and then hit enter. And you can see that I think the balance then from that to that works a little bit better. We've still got plenty of space in front of it, but we've got a little bit more space behind it. I think that worked. And I think similarly with this one, there's the same kind of idea, that in a content aware, if I drag that across similar kind of amount, then it gives us a little bit more space over on the left, kind of space to breathe, really. What I will say, what I do like here is the fact that you've got other bits of shell or dried flowers or whatever, a little bit more texture kind of just coming out into the background here, which is quite nice. It kind of adds texture to it. Now, the next thing is that they are quite dark just in themselves. So if we take the levels, now if you look down at the histogram on the right here, you'll see that everything's built up on the left, which means that all the darks, there's a lot going on in the dark, and there's virtually nothing happening in the lights. And you'll even see that there is a gap between. So if we click on this one over on the far right and just start dragging it up, that brings the light up and we can get more brightness into it. And then immediately that gives it a little bit more life. Similarly, then I think virtually identically, we can, if I go to the levels here, take this and drag it up a similar amount, you can see that we've got more light into it. So that, I think that helps immediately. I think the next thing though is really the part of your problem here, VG, is the angle of the light. If I sort of look at the shadow here cast by this, we can see that the light is coming down from directly above. So in essence, your problem here is that you're using the overhead light, which isn't always the best for bringing out texture. Texture tends to work really well when you're working with a side light, or just side and up a little bit, kind of 30-degree angle or something coming across it. And given the fact that some of these shells really are so beautifully textured, then I think that if you were to have a light source to one side and put it across, you would find that the landscape of the shell, the way the shadows then fall across, so that these spikes here would be casting, you see at the moment, you can see they're casting shadows just underneath these slightly darker patches underneath. But if you sort of had them casting off to one side, I think that would make a much more interesting textured kind of image. And similarly, finally, if we take this and let's drop this into Camera Raw for a moment. Now, with something like this, very quick editing, I think, again, you can take a vignette, just pull in the edges a little bit. But the big thing here, I think, is if you took the clarity tool and we nudge that over, because what we're looking for is to try and emphasize the texture, creating a little bit more contrast. Now, I think maybe the shadows are a bit dark, and pull the shadows up a little bit, and then take that clarity tool and something like that. And if we do that, you can see we've gone from that to this. And that's already given it much more, there's more contrast, there's more texture, there's more interest in it, there's more light and dark. I must say, as well as the little background things, I also like the fact that you've got it diagonal onto the table. I like these diagonal, especially this sort of brighter patch of the wood here. It's a lovely texture of the wood, and the diagonals work well as part of it, much better than if it had just been flat or straight onto it. Similarly with this one, I mean, if I did exactly the same, so that all I've done here is repeat exactly what I did with before, and you can see we've got, and again the diagonals I think work and add to the texture of that. So I hope that helps, Vijay. So in essence then, summing up on those particular photos, you needed a bit more space to the left of them. Having them pushed right up against the edge of the photo meant there was kind of too much space on the right, and not quite enough space on the left. They're not dead centre, but they are off centre, but they still kind of have a feeling of being slightly off centre, so you create the tension. And the other thing is they need to be brighter because they were quite dark. And finally, it's really, and probably most importantly, you need to think about your light source. And rather than using the overhead light, if you've got a separate light source, and then take photos and move it, play around with the light, see what happens if you're taking the light from behind, from the side, from slightly above, from where you are almost sort of slightly below, and experiment with the light. And I think that's where it will really work. You've obviously got a tripod, you can keep the camera steady if you can go down to 1/3 of a second. So that means even if you don't need a very strong light, even a small table lamp or something would make a difference. If there's not enough light being cast, just drop it down, drop down your shutter speed to 1 second, 2 seconds, however long you need to get enough light in, but then move the light source around and see how the shadows are falling. And when you're seeing them, take a photo, move it, take a photo, move it again. You will suddenly find that there are some bits which don't work as well, and some bits which just really hit the sweet spot, and you go, ooh, I like that. And then that's how you're really going to learn, is by moving the light source yourself. So, hope that helps, Fiji. Right, okay, let's just close that and flip back, see if we have any more comments. Fiji says the crop is great. Yes, my mind said rule of thirds, and we'll reshoot having light from the sides. Excellent. And Jim says beautiful shells, Fiji. And Maggie says beautiful colours as well. Yeah, it was a rather lovely colour palette, that I think as well, slightly muted, but yeah, rather beautiful. Okay, right. So next up, then we're going to talk about Vandana. Now, Vandana, in the last critique, I said to Vandana that one of the things I've noticed was she was Vandana's only using her phone at the moment, and but she's constantly kind of taking the pictures in a portrait fashion. So I said, turn it sideways and see what you can get on with, see how you get on with that. Now, Vandana's first photo that she sent in was this one. And she says, this is my landscape photo for critique, please. It was taken from far, therefore I couldn't get the details as sharp. However, the subject was interesting. It looked like the girls were about to go in. I've not edited much, apart from giving it a glow effect. I asked her to send me the original because this looked incredibly cropped into me. But this is the original. It's flipped, but and intensified a bit. But essentially, we've still got the problem of the fact that it's so blurry. There's so little detail. And one of the things I talked before about Vandana is that problem of that with another photo that you took where you'd got quite a large photo, but then you cropped out almost 90% of the picture to get to the bit that you wanted. The problem here is what you've done is you've zoomed in, but you've zoomed in electronically. It doesn't have a zoom lens, so you've sort of done the widening on the screen until you've zoomed right in. But this is a digital zoom. This is doing the equivalent of cropping it, but in the camera. It's not a real zoom. It's not zooming in and still giving you the same amount of detail. So what's happened is we have lost so much detail that it's become, unless you're looking at this on a phone, right, then I mean, I can zoom in, but I can't zoom out any further, and this would be small, and it would be just the quality isn't there. So the other thing I would say is what we've got here is we've got a problem with straight line, with the fact that it's kind of feeling tilted. Your choice is always, do I kind of go straight with the horizon, or do I make sure that the uprights look vertical? And when you've got a lot of poles and stuff here, you do need to have upright verticals. So this whole thing needed to have been tilted a few degrees anti-clockwise, I think, to make sure that particularly this line here, which is particularly strong. Okay, let's just show you that, what I mean with that in Photoshop. See, we need to tilt that so it's more like that. So we've got a couple of strong lines. We've got to kind of watch out because not all of them. And then we probably don't need quite as much paving. And if it's really about the girls, you know, that's a slightly better crop. Now, again, because the girls are here, you might end up with the notion of them being more this side so that you've got space. Let's try that again, but I'll do the content aware, which is deciding not to do. I'm not entirely sure why that's not. Tick the content aware, move that. Should do. If it doesn't, I won't do it again. Okay, don't worry about it. But you understand what I mean. Is that you need more space on one side than you do on the other. And generally speaking, the space you put will be in front of the object rather than behind it. But the biggest problem that you've got here, Vandana, quite straightforwardly, is that there's not enough detail, and that by zooming in digitally on your camera, that's doing the equivalent of cropping out 90% of the information. And so there's not enough information left to have any real quality. That it's more of an impression of the girls in the yard rather than a real sense of, you know, I mean, this photo just doesn't work the moment you try and blow it up. So as well as the next thing I need to say to you then is, as well as having this landscape instead of portrait, what you really need to do is fill the picture that you're trying to get as much as you can within the picture. Don't zoom in, and if you are going to crop, you don't want to be losing more than about 10 to maximum about 20% of your image. Try and fill the image, you know, move forward, move back. Your zoom is basically your arms and your legs rather than trying to digitally zoom on one of these. The phone cameras I'm a huge fan of. I think it's fantastic. A lot of them are amazing quality and you've got them with you. But you also need to know the limitations, and the limitations with these is nearly always zoom. And so, but you need to fill the space as much as you can with that. So, hope that gives you an idea. Now, you did send in a second picture, but given the fact that we're still going to be having this coming Tuesday's one, I'll talk about that one then. So, thanks for sending that one in, Vandana. Let's do that. Okay. Oh, Stacey's here. So good morning, woke a while ago. Of course, for Stacey, Stacey's in Pennsylvania, which is again about 5, possibly 6 hours behind. So still early morning where you are. Glad you could make it though. Glad you got up in time. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is we'll look at Jim. So Jim from Dumfries, who's first one to leave us a comment, hanging on patiently, I hope. So we're going to look for, let's dig out this one and flip across for Jim. And Jim says, took this at the convent in Dumfries. Not sure if I should have made it wider. Have I taken it too close, and would it be better in monochrome? I wanted to capture the cross and the barbed wire. The convent is now locked off for access. It is an amazing building, this one. I think it's now going to be converted into something. I can't remember what it's being converted into, but I have been inside, and it's a huge rambling old building, which would be so much fun to get in and use as a photographic studio. But yeah, so now it's locked off. And to get that notion of the cross in front of the building and the barbed wire, I think to start with, Jim, you've got the elements there. You know, these are, I think, elements to create there's an interesting narrative with it. But in terms of composition, black and whiting, things like that, let's play with this for a moment. So, okay, are you not? Is this? Oh no, here we go. Open with Photoshop. There we go. So just close bandanas there. And now the first thing here, a little bit like I was just saying to Vandana just now, is when you are deciding how to angle the rotation of your image, the question is always, do you line it up with the horizon, you know, sort of the most dominant horizontal, or do you line it up with the dominant vertical? And in this case, especially when you've got a building behind it as well, everything feels slightly tilted over. Now it feels like what you've done is you've lined it up with the top of the fence, but everything feels like it's leaning over to the right a little bit. So from that, I'm very, very tempted to just straighten that up. If we turn this, tilt this to roughly about there, then I forgot that's still on content aware, so that will just fill in the gaps again. But actually I do want to keep it on content aware for something else, so it's taking its time to fill. There we go. Maybe tilted a little bit too far this time, but let's take off the content aware a sec and just pull it something kind of where do I want it? Does that look about right? I think that looks, just fractionally back a bit. I think that probably looks a little bit better. Now, but the other thing is you said about the crop, could you have gone wider? I certainly think you could have gone wider. I think there's some fantastic detail in these, but I think it works really well. I love the way it sort of strings and winds around the barbed wire. But what I also feel though is that the central side of it isn't quite working for us. And I think again, what you really need to do is that off center is going to work better. So let's go back to content aware here. Now you can either have it slightly to the left, something like that, I think, or we kind of do it slightly to the right. And again, I don't know why it suddenly decided it's not going to. I know it is now. So this is just shoving in extra bit for us, but you can see actually I would like that maybe a little bit more. Is it going to, we do something much more like a kind of rule of thirds type thing, maybe even come down a little bit, something like that as well. Yeah, I think maybe get a little bit more of something like this. I think it may well work the other way around. You could have the space to the left or the right. Well, that looks terrible because that's missed out. Why has that done that? Okay, let's just try it the other way then, and we'll just move that a little bit, see if it will give us a decent fill. Yeah, sort of. Tell you what, let's just do a little bit of cloning there, just to give you a sense of. But let's say we take that as a rough idea. I think it might even work better the other way. Doesn't matter. You know what? Well, what I want to do now is I want to go on to the next bit. So I think first of all, your composition. Make sure that you're aligning. You're getting your vertical straight, really, because especially when you've got buildings, a building behind, you don't really want them feeling tilted. That's always going to make you think it ought to be straightened. So getting the verticals straight is more important than the horizontals in this case, I think. The next thing is, I think, go rule of thirds-ish. Certainly off center, more space on one side rather than the other would work. And really you want to do that. That's much better done in camera because then you're going to get this wonderful windy barbed wire kind of leading your line across it, leading your eyes across it. The other thing then is the notion of converting to black and white. And I think certainly with something like this, when you've got, you know, that kind of, you've got that old building, Victorian building, you've got the rusty painted metal, you've got the barbed wire, it is becoming very gothic, and it does feel like it lending itself to black and white. But again, there's a number of ways we can do that. And very straightforwardly, we can go to a gradient map, And yet that's kind of interesting. I think also though the channels, you've got the blue channel where actually there's not as much contrast between the red brick and the kind of bluish black paint. The green channel is a little bit darker, much more contrast in the red channel where the reds of the brickwork have become much lighter. But another thing you can do here is, I mean, even if we just go for a sort of straightforward hue saturation like that, I think you could play around with the curves a bit, and you can lighten and darken and sort of play a bit like that. Now, as soon as I do that, we start, now interestingly here, the quality starts to degrade a little bit, but there's a bit of me that suddenly goes, actually, I kind of like that. Now, whereas in almost every other set of circumstances, I would say I like the idea of, you know, you want to kind of have a low ISO, you want to have as pure an image as you can. This is one where I almost feel like I would like to add noise to it. And so what I mean by it, and to make it feel like a really old photo. So if, when we come to, I'll just duplicate this layer for a moment and let's zoom in a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add noise. So if we go to noise, add noise, you know, now obviously it gets way too noisy like that. And down here, there's not enough to really notice. So we're going to add something now, something like, in this case, for this size of image, around about 14 to 15 in the noise, which is quite a lot. Now, when I've done this, part of the problem here is the noise is almost too uniform, and it's looking like, you know, what we're really wanting is grain, that sense of the old grain that you used to get with, you know, real analog photography rather than noise. So what we then do is we then blur it. Take the Gaussian blur, and again, if you blur it too much, that's no good. Blur it not enough, it's not. So on this case, I'm taking it to around about 2-ish, right? And what 2 does then is now we've got the grain, we've got the blur, and now when we go to black and white, I think it's, and then we take the curves. And then I think it starts to become more interesting. Now, it's still slightly out of focus. I'm not sure what it looks like on your screen. On mine, it's maybe still a touch too much out of focus. So let's take all of this. I'll make a copy onto here and then go into Camera Raw. I think with this, we would want to add in a little bit of vignette because that will also kind of make it look slightly more period. Then I think we can come into the detail and I can up the sharpening, and the sharpening, it will kind of boost the grain, but the grain is slightly blurred as well, so you know, so that works. And then finally, if I'm really wanting to, I might just boost that texture or clarity a little bit, something like that. And so now the photo we end up with is, I think, you know, I mean, it's a very kind of degraded image. It's gone in completely the opposite direction to what I've been talking with Vandana about, which is about getting clearer images and not degrading. Because, and nearly always I would say do that. And it really, even with this, start off with the best ISO that you can get to get the best image, because you can play around with it afterwards. It's just that for this particular image, now I accept this is fully a personal aesthetic choice, but for me, I kind of like that really degraded, grunged, almost over noisy, high contrast, black and white. I think that really is sort of adding to that sense of spookiness, moodiness, atmospheric, gothic-y kind of feel, which is really what your original photo is about. You know, what you like in this, what the narrative is you've got the old building behind, and then we've got the rusted paint and the cross, the spikes on the fence, and the barbed wire. So it's all about that kind of mood. So what we've been trying to do is take that aesthetic and just ramp it up. And by shifting the cross off center, makes a better compositional technique, as does straightening the verticals rather than concentrating on the horizontals. We then turn it to black and white because that certainly has, but then we've degraded the image by adding noise, blurring the noise because the noise itself that we've added in was just too hard. So we blur the noise, but then we kind of resharpen it afterwards. And by blurring it and resharpening it, we're degrading the image further, and then boosting that contrast, and then we end up with this. And this to me just feels aesthetically like a much more interesting, really old Gothic-y snapshot of this kind of scary building that you shouldn't be going into. So I hope you found that one interesting. Jim gave you a few ideas to play around with. Right, okay, so a couple more comments here. Rosie says, would it be possible to take the cross from straight on from the front rather than slightly from the side? That's certainly maybe, with that aesthetic choice of to sort of shift it slightly, or to be face onto it, but I still would have had it slightly off to one side. Jim says, was concentrating on the gate top rather than the building. So always easily done. And I think it's one of those things that when, as photographers, of course, there's something that grabs our interest and that's what we're focusing on. That's the bit that we're interested in. And so easily we kind of forget what's going on in the background. And I think really it's one of those things whereby it's one of these things where experience kind of ends up sooner or later. There comes a point where you have put I've got so many photos where the thing itself seemed great and then the background ruined it, that after a while it started to seep in and I started to notice the background as much as I noticed the foreground, to go, is it aligning? Is it doing what I want it to? So yeah, it's an age-old problem that all of us suffer from. Rosie says, very interesting subject. Anne says, great tips as always. So happy to be able to attend this morning. I'm really glad you could make it, Anne. Love the cross and the barbed wire. Wonderful shot. Maggie says, lovely textures and tangly lines, Jim, and quite sinister with lots of layers of meaning. And Jim says, interesting edits. Must remember the rule of thirds and the verticals. Cool. Okay. Well, that's it. We're just up to about an hour, which is pretty much what I had in mind for this. So this has been the test. This is thank you ever so much for everybody who's turned up. So live YouTube as opposed to live Facebook. The next thing for this is going to be to see what the quality is like when I watch this back. If this works, you see, one of the things that happens for my podcast, you can, like I say, you're here on YouTube, you can go to my YouTube channel and you can watch all previous 70 episodes. Now, while they go out live on Facebook, I record them at my end. I record them on my computer. So that's the one that I edit and then put up onto YouTube. So the quality is always considerably better than the Facebook version. However, by doing that, I have to go through the whole thing. I tweak bits here and there. And so there's a couple of hours worth of editing process of watching it. And then I've got to upload it, which takes a couple of hours more because these are several gigabytes big when you're talking about an hour, 2 hour long videos. This is recording straight onto YouTube. So if this works, this could cut out several hours of time for me, which would be a huge boon. So that's the next bit I have to figure out what it's going to do. So thank you very much for everybody who's turned up. Now, I will just say, don't forget, this Tuesday, 2 days' time, will be the normal podcast on Facebook Live. So do turn up for that. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about hands, okay? Or hands at work, hands doing something. Because I think hands are amazing things and they're wonderful things to photograph, whether they're your own hands or they're the hands of somebody in your house or somebody you know or somebody working away and you manage to get in close. And that's going to set up for the following week, which will be a hands at work challenge. So make sure you turn up on Tuesday. I will also say, having gone through 4 different photos for the critique just now, there's spaces for people to shove in more images for critique for this Tuesday, but please try and get them in either later today or on Monday so that I've got time to have a proper look at them. Right, I think that's just about it. So thank you once again to everyone who's turned up, commented, helped me make sense of this. I will go through this and it all helps me to know whether at some point whether I jump ship and we move from Facebook here to YouTube, or whether I stick with Facebook and just keep the recordings coming here. Right, okay, I will, looking for my glasses up there, they're down here. I think that's pretty much me. Thank you ever so much for turning up, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Cheerio, bye-bye.